There is a specific kind of pain that almost no one sees from the outside. It is the pain of staring at a message that never came, replaying a conversation that seemed warm, intimate, even real, only to be met with distance so cold it makes you question your own memory. It is the silence after closeness, the withdrawal after tenderness, the strange whiplash of being let in just enough to feel chosen, then pushed back out into uncertainty, as if your presence suddenly became too much. And what hurts most is not just that they pulled away. It is that you could feel something in them. You saw it in the way their voice softened when they were tired, in the way they looked at you when they forgot to protect themselves, in the way their body relaxed before their mind caught up and shut the door again. You felt the feeling. You felt the truth. And then you watched them bury it alive right in front of you. So you begin asking the question that can haunt a person for months. If they felt it, why did they hide it? Why deny what was so obvious? Why act detached when their eyes said the opposite? And the answer is more painful and more freeing than most people are ready to hear. Because for many avoidant people, feelings are not comforting. Feelings are danger. Not always conscious danger, not dramatic danger, but deep in the nervous system, where old emotional memory lives without words. Closeness can feel like losing control. Need can feel humiliating. Dependence can feel fatal. So what looks like indifference on the surface is often a stress response underneath. What looks like not caring is sometimes the body trying not to drown. That is the brutal truth most people resist. You think if someone has feelings, they will naturally move closer. But that is not how avoidance works. The stronger the feeling, the stronger the urge to escape it. The more real it becomes, the more pressure they feel to contain it, minimize it, intellectualize it, or disappear from it entirely. Not because the feeling is fake, because the feeling is too real. And that is the part people rarely understand when they are sitting on the other side of the silence, blaming themselves, wondering why affection turned into distance overnight. You were reading emotion. They were managing threat. To you, the moment meant connection. To them, the same moment may have activated every alarm they have spent years learning to outrun. The human nervous system is not built around logic first. It is built around survival first. Long before a person forms a coherent explanation for why they pull away, their body has already made a decision. The amygdala detects emotional intensity and interprets vulnerability as exposure. Cortisol rises. The system shifts into protection. The mind begins creating reasons after the fact. I need space. This is moving too fast. I'm confused. I don't know what I want. Sometimes those reasons are partly true, but often they are also defenses dressed as clarity. Because admitting, I feel too much and I don't know how to hold it, is far more terrifying than pretending, I just don't feel enough. This is why avoidant people can look eerily calm while they are internally flooded. They can seem cold while their mind is racing. They can say very little while feeling far more than they know what to do with. Their silence is not always empty. Sometimes it is crowded. Crowded with longing. Crowded with fear. Crowded with the unbearable tension between wanting closeness and associating closeness with loss of self. That is the contradiction at the heart of it. They crave what scares them. They reach, then retreat. They soften, then seal shut.
And if you have ever loved someone like this, you know how maddening it is.
Because they do not always hide their feelings with obvious rejection. Sometimes they hide them with mixed signals, delayed replies, sudden busyness, vague language, controlled warmth. Enough affection to keep the bond alive, not enough vulnerability to make it safe. They give just enough to maintain connection, but not enough to surrender to it. This is not random. It is regulation. Distance becomes their anesthesia. Silence becomes their control. Detachment becomes the mask they wear so no one sees how deeply something has gotten under their skin. And the tragedy is that many avoidant people do not even fully know this is what they are doing. They think they are being rational, independent, careful. But underneath the polished restraint, the body is often fighting a private war. Dopamine pulled them toward the excitement of connection, the thrill of being seen, the spark of possibility. Then, deeper attachment cues entered the picture, and now the nervous system is no longer dealing with excitement, it is dealing with intimacy, exposure, emotional consequence. That is when the shutdown begins. Not because nothing is there, because too much is there. Imagine them after a moment that mattered. Maybe you were unusually honest. Maybe you looked at them in a way that felt too direct, too loving, too clear. Maybe for 1 second they felt chosen and known at the same time. For a secure person, that might feel grounding. For an avoidant person, that can feel like the edge of a cliff. Their chest tightens. Their thoughts speed up. They start scanning for loss of freedom, expectation, engulfment, disappointment, future pain. And then they do what they have always done when emotions become too loud. They go quiet. Not always to punish you, often to protect themselves from what your closeness woke up. This is why one of the most misunderstood realities of avoidance is that they often hide their deepest feelings most intensely when those feelings matter most. If they truly felt nothing, there would be no need for all the effortful distance, no overthinking, no strange disappearance after intimacy, no visible softening followed by rigid control. Real indifference is usually simple. Avoidance is not simple. It is emotionally expensive. It takes energy to suppress a response, to edit affection, to act unaffected when you are affected, to leave the room in your body before anyone notices you were about to stay. That is why the core concept you need to understand is this: silence is not always absence. Sometimes silence is emotional overload, wearing the costume of self-possession. This does not mean every silent person secretly loves you. It does not mean every withdrawal is proof of hidden depth. But when an avoidant person hides their true feelings, silence is often the place where those feelings go to suffocate. They do not say, "I miss you." They distract themselves until midnight, then check your page when no one is watching. They do not say, "You got to me." They replay your last conversation and tell themselves it meant less than it did. They do not say, "I'm scared of how much I care." They create emotional static, a slower reply, a flatter tone, an excuse, a wall. And on the outside, it can look like nothing. That is the cruelty of it. You are left responding to behavior while never being allowed to touch the fear underneath it. So naturally, many people react the only way pain knows how to react. They chase. They explain. They try to clarify, soothe, reassure, prove, rescue, decode. They become louder in the places where the avoidant became quiet. They think, if I can just make this safe enough, they'll stop hiding. If I can just say it perfectly, love them carefully enough, hold on long enough, they'll finally tell the truth. But this is where the entire dynamic starts to poison you. Because the more you pursue someone who hides their feelings behind withdrawal, the more your energy begins revolving around their defenses instead of your dignity. You stop asking whether the connection is healthy and start obsessing over whether it is real. You abandon your center, trying to interpret their silence. You call it loyalty, patience, understanding. Sometimes it is self-abandonment in slow motion. And here is the shock most people are not prepared for. The avoidant often feels the full weight of your absence only when your chasing stops. Not because they enjoy games, because constant pursuit lets them stay in defense mode. It gives them something external to resist, something to manage, something to define themselves against. But when you become still, when you stop over-explaining, stop begging for emotional evidence, stop feeding the anxious cycle, something changes. The noise disappears. The pressure shifts. And suddenly, they are left alone with what they were using distance to avoid in the first place: their own feelings. That is when silence changes shape. At first, they may feel relief, space, control. But then, the nervous system settles just enough for the attachment bond to become audible again. The dopamine of uncertainty turns inward. Memory grows louder. Your absence creates contrast. The warmth they minimized becomes more vivid because it is no longer immediately available. What they escaped now has room to echo. And that is when missing you can become unbearable. Not theatrically, quietly, dangerously. They wonder if you are done. They check for signs. They revisit old messages. They remember your tone, your patience, your presence, your steadiness. And because avoidant people often suppress emotions in real time, they may only fully feel the impact later, when the relationship is no longer pressing directly against their defenses. This is why they can appear detached during connection, and then suddenly preoccupied after distance. This is why they can seem unmoved while you are there, and deeply unsettled once you stop reaching. This is why the power dynamic can flip so sharply, not because you manipulated them, because you removed the structure that allowed them to stay defended. You stopped performing emotional labor for two people. You stopped translating their silence for them. You stopped volunteering your nervous system as the container for their unprocessed fear. And in that stillness, they begin to meet the truth they were hiding from. The truth that you mattered. The truth that they felt more than they admitted. The truth that losing you feels different from controlling you. But here is the warning. This is the moment so many people sabotage their own awakening. The avoidant begins to lean back in. A breadcrumb, a late-night message, a subtle check-in, a tone shift. Something soft but incomplete. And because your heart has been starving, you are tempted to rush back into the old role immediately, to reward the smallest sign of openness with full emotional access, to pour your whole soul into a crack in the door and call it progress. Be careful, because if you break your own pattern too soon, the old dynamic returns almost instantly. They feel your pursuit again, and their defenses reactivate. You interpret that as rejection. Panic returns, and now both of you are standing inside the same familiar wound. Them hiding, you reaching. Them withdrawing, you unraveling. Nothing changes until the pattern changes. And the pattern does not change because you finally say the perfect thing. It changes when your self-worth becomes stronger than your desperation for emotional confirmation. That is the real turning point. Not when they confess, when you stop needing the confession to know your value. Because the deepest trap in these dynamics is not their avoidance. It is your belief that their expression determines your reality. But if they would just admit what they feel, you could finally exhale. But your peace cannot live in someone else's nervous system. Your worth cannot depend on whether another wounded person has the capacity to reveal what is true. Yes, they may have cared. Yes, they may still care. Yes, they may hide enormous feeling behind restraint, silence, distance, and control. But none of that changes the central question of your life. Can they meet you in the open? Or will you keep shrinking yourself to survive their closed doors? That is where the fantasy has to die. Not every hidden feeling becomes love in action. Not every overwhelmed heart becomes a brave one. Some people will feel deeply and still choose distance. Some will miss you and still remain silent. Some will ache for you privately while continuing to deny you publicly. And you have to be strong enough not to confuse internal feeling with relational capacity. Because what heals you is not being secretly loved. It is being clearly valued. Read that again in your bones. Not secretly loved, clearly valued. There is a massive difference. One keeps you addicted to potential. The other allows you to rest. One makes you hypervigilant. The other makes you safe. One turns you into an interpreter. The other lets you be a person. And once you truly understand this, something extraordinary happens inside you. The obsession starts to loosen. The constant decoding begins to feel beneath you. Not because you stop caring, but because your care is no longer for sale to emotional unavailability. You begin to see their silence for what it is. Not a puzzle you were born to solve, but a limit they have not yet learned to cross. That realization is painful, but it is pure power. Because now, when they hide their true feelings, you no longer collapse into self-doubt. You no longer automatically assume that silence means you were too much, too needy, too emotional, too hard to love. You understand the deeper truth. Sometimes your presence touched a place in them they did not know how to survive. Sometimes your consistency exposed their inconsistency. Sometimes your openness made their armor feel heavy. Sometimes the reason they hid was not because you were insignificant. It was because you were significant. And that matters. Not because it means you should wait, because it means you can stop blaming yourself. You can stop rewriting your beauty into burden. You can stop confusing someone's emotional limitation with evidence of your inadequacy. That is the identity shift. You are not the one left behind by truth. You are the one becoming too honest for half love. You are the one learning that real power is not in making an avoidant person confess what they feel. Real power is in becoming so anchored in your own worth that whether they confess or not no longer controls your nervous system. You stop measuring your value by someone else's capacity for closeness. You stop romanticizing emotional unavailability as depth. You stop mistaking mystery for meaning. And suddenly, the energy changes. You speak less, but mean more. You chase less, but attract clarity. You need less performance, less proof, less decoding. Your silence is no longer a plea, it is discernment. Your distance is no longer a wound, it is self-respect. Your heart is no longer standing outside locked doors, begging to be let in. It is walking away from rooms where love must hide to survive. That is when everything flips. Because the person who once obsessed over what they felt begins to understand something far more important. What you feel about yourself determines the entire standard of your life. And when that standard rises, hidden feelings stop seducing you. Intermittent warmth stops impressing you. You no longer melt at signs of internal conflict. You look for courage, presence, consistency, emotional availability, a love that does not need translation. And if they come back, if they reach out, soften, reveal, return, then let them come toward a version of you that no longer bleeds for fragments. Let them meet someone who can recognize their pain without volunteering to live inside it. Let them meet someone who understands avoidance but does not worship it. Let them meet someone who knows that deep feeling is beautiful, but only action turns feeling into something livable. Because you were never meant to spend your life trying to extract honesty from people who fear their own hearts. You were meant to become the kind of person who no longer bargains with silence. The kind of person whose self-worth does not tremble in the face of mixed signals. The kind of person who can say, with devastating calm, "I believe you felt something. I also believe I deserve more than hidden feelings." And that is freedom. Not the moment they finally admit it. The moment you no longer need them to. The moment your body stops confusing uncertainty with love. The moment your nervous system chooses peace over pursuit. The moment you realize that your power was never in making them stay. It was in refusing to abandon yourself while they decided whether to feel. So, if you have been sitting in the dark, trying to understand why someone who clearly cared could act like they didn't, hear this carefully. They may have hidden their true feelings because those feelings overwhelmed them, because closeness exposed them, because vulnerability threatened the identity they built to survive, because wanting you felt like danger. But your job is not to shrink into something less overwhelming. Your job is to become so whole, so grounded, so deeply aligned with your own value that anyone who wants access to you must meet you without disguise. No more begging for emotional truth. No more translating coldness into love. No more earning what should be given freely. Let them hide if they choose to hide. Let them feel in silence if they choose silence. Let them wrestle with themselves if that is the only intimacy they know. And you? You become someone who no longer mistakes hidden feeling for enough. You become someone whose presence is not an audition. Someone whose love is not a rescue mission. Someone who can feel deeply without collapsing, care fully without chasing, and walk away without doubting their worth. That is the transformation. That is the power. That is the moment the story stops being about why avoidants hide their feelings and starts becoming about why you will never again hide from your own worth.